was in the playground. Nadine had a surprise. It was a plastic snake. He had bought it on holiday. Mrs. May called everyone inside. Anina had an idea. She wanted to play a trick on Mrs. May. Leave the snake here, she said. The children went inside. Mrs. May told them to sit down. Mrs. May, called Anina. I see a snake in the playground. I can see it too, said Wilf. Everyone said they could see it. Mrs. May looked outside. There is a snake outside, she said. Mrs. May gave Anina a plastic bag. She told her to put the snake in the bag. Oh, Mrs. May, you knew it was a plastic snake, said Biff. Now for my snake, said Mrs. May. What snake is that? Said Biff. Leader, said Mrs. May. You can all do some addition sums. Everyone was doing addition sums. The sums were hard. Then Wilf looked outside. Look, he yelled. There was a donkey in the playground. It's a donkey, called Anina. Mrs. May, everyone called. There is a donkey in the playground. Mrs. May looked cross. Is it made of plastic too? She said. It's true, Mrs. May, called Wilf. Look out of the window. Mrs. May looked out of the window. She saw the donkey. Someone will have to catch it, said Anina. Mrs. May can catch it with a plastic bag, called Nadine. Mrs. May was cross. Don't be silly, Nadine, she said. Should we phone animal rescue? Asked Biff. That's a good idea, Biff, said Mrs. May. Sit quietly while I go to the phone. At playtime, the children talked about the donkey. It was easy to catch, began Wilf, but then it will not move, said Anina. Two people put it, began Chip, and two people push it, said Biff. We didn't do any more work, said Nadine. Well, it's time to work now, said Mrs. May. Come back to the classroom. You can learn to spell something. Spell what? Mrs. May, said Wilf. Donkey, said Mrs. May. Everyone was doing spelling. Wilf looked into the playground. Look, he yelled. There was a goose outside. It's a goose, said Anina. Mrs. May, there's a goose in the playground. Mrs. May looked cross. Don't be silly, Anina, she said. It's true, Mrs. May, said Chip. Look out of the window. Mrs. May looked out of the window. Oh my goodness, she said. But it may not be a goose. It may be Gander. Will you call animal rescue? Said Nadine. Yes, said Mrs. May, but I'm going to shoot it on the field. It can't stay in the playground. The children wanted to help. No, said Mrs. May. Sit quietly. She went outside and waved her arms at the gander. The gander looked at Mrs. May. Then it began to chase her. The gander has picked Mrs. May on the bottom, yelled Biff. Mrs. May came inside. Are you all right, Mrs. May? Asked Anina. Yes, thank you, said Mrs. May. I've got a joke, said Nadine. What food do ganders like? We don't know, said Chip. Gooseberries, laughed Nadine.